They sensed a great opportunity because Israelis wanted to capture more territories. And of all these territories, the only slice of the territory which the Israelis have returned is the Sinai Peninsula. But in 6 days, Israel had already captured all the territories.
In this episode, we turned back the clock. Before the bombs, before the barbed wire, we looked at life in Ottoman Palestine, the rise of Zionism, the British Mandate, and the growing divide between Jewish and Arab communities. Then came 1948, the creation of Israel, the first Arab Israeli war, and the mass displacement of Palestinians. But that was not the end of the conflict. It was the beginning of a long and turbulent new chapter in the region. In the years that followed, war, occupation, and resistance shaped the region again and again. Borders shifted, cities changed hands, and entire generations grew up knowing only conflict. None of these were just military battles. They were struggles over land, identity, memory, religion, and survival. They were about the right to return and the right to remain. So today we ask a few difficult questions. What triggered these wars? What was each side trying to protect and to gain? And why did every ceasefire feel more like a pause than a resolution? I am Sharmada Venkatasubramanian and this is Global Fault Lines. Joining me today is Johny, the Hindu's International Affairs editor. So, in last week's episode, we ended in 1948, mainly during the Arab-Israel war. What was the situation like then? We discussed a little bit about what happened during the war and all that, but right after, how did it sort of ease down, and what was the geography like there?
So we have already talked about the UN partition plan, right? And this was put to vote in the United Nations in November 1947, just a few months after we became independent. And in the UN General Assembly, the partition plan got the approval, as we have already talked about it. One of the immediate consequences of the partition plan was a civil war in Palestine. We are talking about the historical Palestine, the mandatory Palestine, because the Jews or the Zionists, Zionist leadership at that time, they argued that, yes, they have got the mandate from the United Nations to establish their own country, whereas the Arabs said that, no, we haven't accepted it yet. And that led to clashes between Jewish militias. You know, there were, Irgun was there, Haganah was there, were a number of Jewish militias were there. And the Palestinians, basically the Arab population. That led to a series of clashes in the region. And this was building up. And in 1948, from April onwards, the Zionists launched a plan, basically. And the plan was aimed at depopulating Arab towns.
Right.
Because they knew that they would eventually declare the state of Israel. Because the British mandate was coming to an end. It would come to an end in May 1948. So April, they started rolling out this plan, basically aimed at depopulating Palestinian towns. And we know that the State of Israel was created in 1948, May 14th, basically the day before the British mandate expired, which immediately would lead to the first Arab-Israel war. But then the depopulation of the Palestinians, which started much earlier, that intensified. Right. For example, if you look at the UN partition plan, the UN partition plan offered, let's say, 55% of the historical Palestine for the Jewish state, the rest for the Arabs. But during the war, what the Israelis did was to capture more territories. Because immediately after the state of Israel was established, Arab countries, including Jordan, which at that time was called Transjordan, and then Egypt, Syria, and then other countries, for example, Iraq joined the war by sending a force, basically, to join the war. They declared war against the newly created state. And the battle would take place largely in historical Palestine. But the Israelis would defend basically the Jewish areas and also the Arab areas that were depopulated. For example, in places like Jaffa or in the Negev desert in the south or in the Upper Galilee region in the north. So Upper Galilee is close to the Lebanese-Syrian border. So Negev is in the south, which is close to Gaza. You know, it's actually the Negev towns that came under attack on October 7th. So these towns were depopulated. Arabs were pushed out of their homes. That was an orchestrated campaign, highly organized campaign. And Israelis would capture these areas. So at the end of the war, what happened was that 60% of the land that was allocated for the Arabs were captured by the newly created state.
Right. So by end of war, which period are we talking about?
1949. So
Right.
the war lasted, let's say, 10 months. It started in May 1948, and in 10 months you will have an armistice agreement.
Right.
So after the armistice agreement, what will happen is that, so let's say 60% of the land allocated for the Arabs by the UN, which if you look at the historical Palestine, 22% territory is more than what was promised to Israel. So roughly 75% territories are now with Israel, right? This would, which means by the end of the war, the geography has changed.
Right.
It used to be one single entity, which was called Palestine. And it used to be the British Mandatory Palestine, basically a colonized region. And the British had exited. A Jewish state was created. And by the end of the war, the Jewish state had seized more territories than what the UN had even proposed. Right. So now, if you look at the map, the West Bank is basically the western bank of the Jordan River. Right? And then you have the Gaza Strip. So if you look at the map, there is no geographical contiguity between Gaza and the West Bank. But if you look at the UN map, there is. Right. Actually, there is a geographical contiguity between Gaza and the West Bank as per the UN map. Okay. But in 1949, there is no contiguity. So Gaza was separated from the West Bank, but these two regions became the Palestinian outposts, basically. And then you have Jerusalem, right? Jerusalem, according to the UN, was supposed to be an international territory, but then half of Jerusalem was captured by the Israelis, West Jerusalem, and the other half was taken by the Jordanians. Right. So, Israel has taken roughly 75% of historical Palestine. The Jordanians will take over the West Bank, East Jerusalem, and the Egyptians will take over the Gaza Strip. Right. That's how the war came to an end in 49.
So did it remain this way for a good while after that?
Until 1967.
Right. Okay. But because before that was the not necessarily to do with Palestine, but 1956 Suez Crisis, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was basically Egyptian president who sort of nationalized the Suez Canal.
That's right.
So why was there a war? So if I'm right, it was Britain, France, and Israel.
Israel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what was this combination? Why did it necessarily affect Israel to, go into war with Egypt?
So Israel started the war.
Right.
But, there was a larger, deeper conspiracy behind the Suez War, which was revealed much later. The British and the French were on board. Right. They always knew they wanted Israel to start the war so that they can also join the war.
Right.
And the main reason was that, as you said, Jamal Abdel Nasser, who was the president of Egypt, he had nationalized the Suez Canal.
Right.
Nationalized means Suez Canal until then, from late 19th century until 1956, right? It was operated by the Suez Company.
Right.
And the Suez Company was partly owned by the French and the British.
Okay.
So basically the French and the British were operating the Suez Canal in Egypt.
Right.
So when Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal, the British and the French were furious.
Yeah.
And the British of 1956, we are talking about in the immediate aftermath of the Second World War.
Yeah.
And until the end of the Second World War, the British were the superpowers, right? And during the interwar period, the British and the French were the masters of the Middle East or West Asia, whatever you would like to call it. So the British were furious. And for Israel, why Israel did this? First of all, Israel has an issue with Egypt. Right. They fought a war in 1948-49.
Yeah.
The Egyptians continued to occupy Gaza Strip. They had a parallel government in Gaza, by the way, which was a government of Palestinian.
Right.
Palestinian government in exile was there in in Gaza Strip. They had a prime minister who was backed by the Egyptians.
Right.
Okay. So, of course, the Israelis have a problem with Egypt. And Nasser was kind of emerging as the leader of Pan-Arabism, third world leader. He was very close to Nehru.
Yeah.
And another interesting point is that if you look at the map, you can see the Gulf of Tehran and the Gulf of Aqaba. So Red Sea is the water body that opens into the Mediterranean Ocean, right? Mediterranean Sea. And the Gulf of Tehran is basically the opening between the Red Sea and the Gulf of Aqaba. So if Israel wanted access to the Red Sea, then it has to go through the Gulf of Tehran.
Right.
And the Egyptians had imposed a blockade on Gulf of Tehran. So Israel did not have freedom of movement across the Gulf of Aqaba. So, Israel always had a reason. They wanted to basically free up the space, and they have a running hostility with the Egyptians. And when the French and the British asked them to start the war, they started the war.
Right.
And there are interesting similarities between the Suez crisis and the Iran war.
Right.
Because when the Iran war happened, immediately after that, the Americans actually asked for Americans said that we were still willing to do a deal with the Iranians, right? And Trump said that I haven't made up my mind. But then eventually he would join the war.
Yeah.
So when the Suez War began, the French and the British would initially ask for a ceasefire.
Right.
They would urge both sides to end the hostilities.
Right.
But then eventually they would join the war.
Right.
But then later it was revealed that they always knew that, or rather there was a deeper conspiracy. And it was because of Suez that the French shared nuclear technology with the Israelis, because Israel is a nuclear power. There is a famous quote by the French Prime Minister back in the 1950s. He said, "I owe them the bloody bomb."
Right.
The French shared nuclear technology, and David Ben-Gurion started a nuclear facility in Dimona in the Negev desert. He called it a desalination plant back in the 1950s. And in the 1960s, the Israelis would become a nuclear power.
Yeah.
So the roots of Israel's basically nuclear capability go back to the Suez War.
Right.
Yeah.
And was this the period when they captured the Sinai Peninsula and the Golan Heights?
Yeah, that is in 1967.
Right. Okay.
So 1967, of course.
So the famous 6-day war.
6-day war, yeah.
What was the reason for it to start at that point specifically? And why did Israel, preemptive strike? What was the reason for that?
Yeah, the Israelis call it preemptive.
Yeah.
Except that it was not preemptive. The Israelis, they started the war again in 1967 because they sensed a great opportunity because Israelis wanted to capture more territories. Right. The map basically remained intact since 1949.
Right.
During the Suez War, yes, the Israelis had taken over part of Sinai Peninsula, but they came under great pressure from both the Americans and the Soviets.
Yes, again, sorry to deviate back to that topic, but why? Because that was like the peak of the Cold War time.
That's right.
And US clearly had one stance and USSR had another. But why did they both intend to, stop this? And
because the Americans knew that they were the new masters, not the British. The British time was over.
Right.
And the Americans didn't know about the British plan. They were caught by surprise when the Suez crisis actually broke out. And Egypt was an influential country in the third world. And the Americans, the President Eisenhower, thought that this would push Egypt to the Soviet side. He did not want that to happen. Because all said and done, India, Egypt, and Yugoslavia to a certain extent, they hadn't gone completely to the Soviet side, right? India was very particular about non-alignment under Nehru. And the Egyptians were also supporting non-alignment. So the Americans they knew that the Soviets were trying to build blocks of influence in the third world. So they did not want this war by the British and the French and the Israelis to push the Egyptians deeper into the Soviet hands.
Right.
And the Americans were also angry that they did not know about the war. So they told Britain that if Britain did not stop the war, they would start selling the British bonds. President Eisenhower even threatened the Israelis to stop essential supplies unless the Israeli troops withdrew from the Suez Canal, the Sinai region. And the Soviet Prime Minister, Bulganin, and Khrushchev was the General Secretary of the Soviet Communist Party. Stalin had already died. And the Soviet Prime Minister had actually said that you withdraw from Sinai or face Soviet rockets. That was, an open threat to the Israelis. And the Israelis actually complied. The war turned out to be disastrous for the Israelis as well as the British. Because the British, I don't know whether they have realized it yet, but the world realized that Britain stopped being a superpower in 1956. So the borders did not change in 1956. So in 1967, Israel sensed a great opportunity,
Right.
basically, because that experiment between Syria and Egypt to create a united Arab Republic turned out to be a disaster.
Yeah.
The Arab unity was proved to be a myth. And even in Jordan, basically Jordan tried to, annex East Jerusalem and the West Bank, but the Jordanian control was not very strong.
Yeah.
Then Israel started the war. They called it preemptive war because they said otherwise the Egyptians would come and attack them. And you can see on the first day of the war, Israel would destroy the Egyptian Air Force.
Right.
They would carry out massive airstrike, targeting Egyptian airfields and as well as their fighter jets. And on the second day, they will fight the Jordanians in the ground. So in 6 days, basically, they will defeat all their basically all 3 neighboring countries,
Right.
Egypt, Jordan, and Syria. And this war, and Israel was also at the pinnacle of their power in 1967, because in 6 days, they would defeat their neighboring countries. And this would also alter the map. For example,
Right.
they would capture East Jerusalem and West Bank from the Jordanians.
Yeah.
They would capture the Sinai Peninsula and Gaza Strip from the
As
Egyptians,
well as the Golan Heights.
and the Golan Heights from the Syrians.
Right.
And of all these territories, the only slice of the territory which the Israelis have returned is the Sinai Peninsula.
Right.
Everything else, the West Bank, Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights, it's still, and East Jerusalem, everything else is still with the Israelis.
Right. So, what was the world's response to this? Because I'm sure they wouldn't have expected this per se. I mean, no one would have expected this. But
Yeah.
what was the response to that? Because until that point, was Israel considered to be this powerful, or was it? Of course, people recognized it as an independent state,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
to this extent?
No, I think after the war, the immediate response was that the UN Security Council passed a resolution asking Israel to pull back from all the territories it captured.
Right.
So that's why we still say that when we talk about an independent Palestinian state, we say that an independent Palestinian state based on the 1967 border, the reference, it became a common reference now, which is also called the Green Line Palestine. So the reference is to 1967. So yes, there are UN Security Council resolution. 1967 there is one, 1973 there is another one, which repeatedly asked Israel to pull back from the territories it captured.
Right.
But at the same time, the United States sort of discovered Israel in 1967. So imagine, 1967, America was stuck in Vietnam,
Yeah.
right? And the Soviet Union was seen as resurgent and powerful in the Cold War. And here, Israel was winning the war in 6 days, defeating all their neighbors. And Egypt, at that time, by that time, was very close to the Soviets, by the late 1960s. Syria was very close to the Soviets.
Yeah.
So when the Americans looked at the region, they saw that Israel was basically fighting against Soviet Union's partners
Right.
and winning quick victories. And I mean, the Israel of 1967 is different from today's Israel.
Yeah.
Today's Israel is completely and entirely dependent on the Americans. They can't defend themselves without the United States. That was proved during the Iran war, right?
Yeah.
67 was different because the US involvement was limited at that time. But Israel, the United States kind of discovered Israel as a very powerful ally in the region. And the special relationship, basically, which Kennedy called it special relationship in the early 1960s, the actual special relationship was, built, or the foundation of that special relationship was built after the 67 war.
So how did this come to an end, this specific 1967 war? Was there intervention from other sides?
UN Security Council passed a resolution asking Israel to pull back and demanding a ceasefire.
Right.
The United States also supported the ceasefire.
But why? Again, because, like you mentioned, United States was clearly aiding Israel, while USSR was on the side of Egypt and Syria. So why would they also intervene and say, let's
But in 6 days, Israel had already captured all the territories. Right. I mean, even for Israel, there was no point in continuing the war. Right. They got the whole of Palestine, right? So, because the whole historic Palestine which we are talking about, and now in 1967 June, Israel was in control of the whole of Palestine, which today the Jewish settlers would call Judea and Samaria. That's what they call the West Bank, right? And East Jerusalem, because East Jerusalem is the holy city where you have the Wailing Wall and Al-Aqsa Mosque and the Church of Holy Sepulchre. Israel was in control, Moshe Dayan, who was the defense minister, the army chief, I think, who later became the defense minister. Moshe Dayan went to Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. He visited the Wailing Wall, and then he told the press that I returned to my homeland after centuries, and I will never leave from East Jerusalem. That's a famous quote. If you look at it from an Israeli point of view, they got what they wanted in 6 days.
Right.
And there is a UN Security Council resolution asking for a ceasefire and asking Israel to pull back. Israel never pulled back, but Israel agreed to a ceasefire. The Arabs on the other side were humiliated. Right? Nasser would die in 2 years after the war. He will never recover from the shock this has inflicted on him. Syria would never stand up to Israel. Even today, after the war. They haven't got their land territories back. They are actually losing more territories today, right? Jordan, again, would make a peace deal with Israel later on. I mean, even now you look at Jordan's response. So, the conventional threat from the Arab world to Israel basically would, let's say that Israel would establish dominance over its Arab. It would be tested in 1973 again, but basically Israel would establish its dominance in the region vis-a-vis the Arab governments in 1967.
When in this timeline, when exactly was the Camp David Accords? Because that was again an attempt to bring peace between the Arab states and especially Egypt, right? So was it before the 67 war or after?
No. So Camp David comes in 1978.
Right. Okay. That was even after the Yom Kippur.
After the Yom Kippur War.
So let's discuss the Yom Kippur War.
I mean, you can't discuss Camp David basically without talking about Yom Kippur. These two are connected, So 67, Israel would capture these territories. So they would capture the whole of Palestine, also Sinai Peninsula.
Right.
Sinai is an Egyptian territory. So the Egyptians, and Nasser would die in 2 years. Sadat would become the next president, Anwar Sadat. And for Sadat, he wanted Sinai back.
Right.
His immediate priority was not the liberation of Palestine, of course. His immediate priority was to get the Egyptian territory back. And Sadat knew that the Israelis would not give it back to him unless he shakes them up. So, on 1973, on the Yom Kippur Day, in October, everything happens in October with regard to Israel and Palestine. I mean, even October 7. What will happen? Egypt would launch a surprise attack. Egypt and Syria would launch a surprise attack in the Sinai Peninsula as well as in Golan.
Right.
And in Sinai, Egyptian troops would make dramatic advances. Golda Meir was the prime minister. It's a labor government, prime minister of Israel. And the Israelis would lose hundreds of tanks. They would take huge casualties. They did not expect a war. It was a complete failure from the Israeli side, from an intelligence point of view.
How did they overcome that initial defeat? And was the significance of that day, did that intensify the situation more?
Because it was a holiday. Nobody was prepared to fight. The soldiers were on leave. Basically, they were observing the religious holiday. Then the Egyptians would come in and they would make dramatic advances in Sinai. And the Israelis thought that they were losing the war. And Israeli leadership at that time, they called it a major setback. And Golda Meir asked for offensive support from the United States, and initially the Americans were reluctant because there was some kind of an agreement between the Americans and the Soviets not to provide offensive support to their allies, during the Cold War. But then the Golda Meir said again, it's also a very famous quote. She says, "If I am going down, I'll bring the entire region down."
Right.
I mean, she was basically saying that if we are losing the war, we will nuke the Egyptians. It was a big threat, right? And then the Americans would start their largest airlift in the history, largest airlift of offensive and defensive weapons. They would supply everything to the Israelis. And that's how they turned around the war. They would eventually turn around the war, push the Egyptians out of Sinai Peninsula. But the war was mainly happening in Sinai, not in Israel proper, right? But push the Egyptians out of Sinai Peninsula. But still, October 1973 would remain a blot on IDF, because in 1967, IDF thought that they have basically established deterrence.
Yeah.
And Egypt wanted to prove them wrong. And Egypt did actually prove them wrong.
Yeah.
And Golda Meir had to resign as the prime minister, unlike Netanyahu,
Yeah,
who's still
yeah.
in power, right? Golda Meir was held accountable for the failures of the Yom Kippur
Right.
War, and then she quit as the prime minister.
Right.
And Labour's hegemony over Israel's polity would also come to an end after the Yom
Yeah,
Kippur War.
yeah.
Okay, of course, Labour will come back to power, but eventually the fall of Labour would start with Yom Kippur. No? So then Israel realized after that, I mean, Israel of 1970s, I would argue that they were better at, exploring their own challenges and then coming up with constructive solutions rather than their leadership today. They realized that Egypt remains a conventional threat.
Right.
You need to make peace with the Egyptians. And the Egyptians were open. That's what Sadat wanted to do. He wanted to send a message that we want Sinai back.
Yeah.
We are ready to make peace with you, but if you don't give us back, we will continue to remain a threat.
Right.
That was the message of Yom Kippur, and the message was very well received in Tel Aviv.
Right.
And interestingly, it was Menachem Begin, who was a Likud prime minister, a right-wing prime minister, who made peace with the Egyptians.
Right.
So Camp David followed Yom Kippur, and Camp David was hosted by Jimmy Carter.
Yeah.
And Carter had also exerted pressure on the Israelis, right, on Begin. And then they, as part of Camp David, the Israelis agreed to return Sinai Peninsula back to the Egyptians.
Right.
And the Egyptians would officially recognize the state of Israel. And Egypt would become the first Arab country to recognize the state of Israel.
Yeah.
And Sadat also wanted to get something for the Palestinians, because by 1973, the Palestinian nationalism was pretty strong.
Yeah.
PLO was already there.
Yes.
Yasser Arafat was the leader of the PLO. Fatah has been there from the 1950s onwards. But in 1960s, Yasser Arafat would establish the PLO, right? So the Palestinians, they were based first in Jordan, and then they would move to Lebanon, basically to southern Lebanon, their leadership, Yasser Arafat and others. So Sadat knew that he wanted to get something for the Palestinians. So he pushed for what eventually became the framework for peace in the Middle East agreement.
Yeah.
So in the framework agreement, the Israelis would agree to respect basically the Palestinian self-governing rights. So this was the first time in 1978 that Israel would recognize the Palestinian nationalism. Until then, they were in denial. Until then, they had not recognized it. But as part of the framework agreement, they would recognize it. And this was also part of the Camp David agreement, the framework agreement. So the framework agreement promised self-governing authority for the Palestinians, which would be realized only after Oslo in the 1990s. Yeah.
So right after that, in 1982, was the Lebanon War.
Lebanon War, yeah.
So what was the reason for that? Of course, Israel had reasoning saying it had something to do with PLO, but why in Lebanon? What was the relationship?
So the PLO was there in Jordan, right?
Yeah.
And in Jordan, in 1970, the PLO was expelled by the Jordanian king, King Hussein, because the PLO was fighting the Israelis. The Israelis would cross the border and come to Jordan and fight them. So, and the Jordan king also was threatened by the presence of PLO. So he would basically crack down on the Palestinians. It's called the Black September.
Yeah.
So King Hussein was later asked in the later stage of his career as the monarch that what was the hardest decision he took in his life. He said the decision to bomb my own city. So he was referring to Black September. So the Palestinians were expelled from Amman, and then they would move to Beirut, basically southern Beirut and south of Lebanon.
Okay.
So the PLO was operating from southern Lebanon, right across northern Israel, Upper Galilee region, right? And they would carry out attacks. They would start firing their short-range rockets.
Right.
They would carry out cross-border attacks, targeting both civilians as well as the Israeli troops in the region, in the Upper Galilee region. So Israel, in 1978, actually Israel launched Operation Galilee. So Operation Galilee, the plan was to basically carry out a swift military operation, pushing the PLO in the north of Galilee.
Right.
So Galilee River, basically divides southern Lebanon from the rest of Lebanon. So they wanted to push the PLO to the north of Galilee. 1978, but that mission, they did not achieve anything out of that, and then they had to basically pull back. 1982, again, Begin was the prime minister. Begin said the war will bring 40 years of peace. That's what he said when he launched the war. And then they wanted to push the PLO out. And Israel had other plans as well. Israel had a plan to basically bring in regime change in Lebanon, and then bring in a government that is favorable towards Israel, force the PLO out of the country, remake basically Lebanon's polity, etc., etc. But that didn't happen. But what Israel did was, yes, Israel managed to force the PLO out of Lebanon. The PLO would move from Lebanon to Tunisia, after the Israeli intervention. The Israeli troops would never leave, would not immediately leave after the 1982 war, because in the south they would basically set up their own military posts and continue to occupy southern parts of Lebanon.
Didn't they do that for almost 2 decades after? They didn't immediately leave.
Right? They didn't. Right. From 1982 to 2000. They left in 2000.
Right.
And they left in 2000 because of the resistance by Hezbollah, which was created after the Israeli invasion of Lebanon.
Right.
So the 1982 Israeli invasion of Lebanon is significant because it is the Israeli invasion that led to the creation of Hezbollah.
Right.
So when we talk about 1982, we should also understand that in 1979 in Iran, the revolution happened. The theocrats came to power. Khomeini captured power. So in 1982, when Israel launched the war in Lebanon, basically the Iranians sensed an opportunity to mobilize the Shias, who were a sizable community in Lebanon, but historically and politically underprivileged.
Right.
So the Iranians played a major role in mobilizing the Shia people under the banner of Hezbollah. So they built it up, So Hezbollah turned out to be a ferocious resistance organization, and because of which Israel had to eventually leave Lebanon in 2000. So it took 18 years, but eventually they had to leave.
Right.
Yeah.
And right after that, around that time, before the first Intifada, was also the creation of Hamas and the rise of Hamas.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
So Hamas was, I think, created in 1987.
Yeah.
I mean, before Hamas, there was this organization called Islamic Center.
Right.
That was also led by Sheikh Ahmad Yassin, who is the spiritual founder of Hamas. Who was assassinated by the Israelis in, I think, 2002 or 3. So Sheikh Ahmad Yassin established Islamic Center, but Islamic Center was not politically motivated or involved at the beginning. Their focus was to, quote-unquote, purify the Palestinian society. Basically rebuild them as per the Islamic ethos. Right? But then, 1987, Hamas was formed as a resistance force. And when the Islamic Center was there, Islamic Center was recognized as a charity by the Israelis. That's why many people today say that Israel had played a major role in the creation of Hamas.
Right.
That I don't know, but clearly the Islamic Center was registered as a charity by the Israelis, and Islamic Center had raised money for their activities with Israel's blessings. Because Israel wanted some kind of a counterforce to the PLO.
Right.
In the 1970s, their main enemy was the PLO. PLO is secular nationalist movement. And they are not a religious-oriented group, right? But then Israel had kind of, gave some space to the Islamic Center. But 87, Islamic Center transforms itself into Hamas.
Could that be a reason why it was not much of a threat when it started out? Because it was much later in the late 90s that Americans officially called it a terrorist group, right?
That's right.
Initially, it wasn't much of a threat.
It wasn't. Right. PLO was the main force. Even during the Intifada, the PLO was leading the strikes and protests against the Israelis. Hamas was mainly operating from Gaza, not in the West Bank. And Gaza, yes, Hamas had carried out some attacks. But Hamas gained currency only after Oslo. I mean, that's what many people don't understand. Because, Oslo, the promise was the creation of a Palestinian state. And the Palestinians made a huge compromise in Oslo. The Palestinians said that, yes, they wanted the creation of a Palestinian state based on the 1967 border, with East Jerusalem being their capital. And what many people outside the Israel-Palestine dynamics fail to understand is that 1967 border is just 22% of the Palestinian territory.
Right.
Historical Palestinian territory. So when the PLO recognized the state of Israel, 1993, as part of Oslo, what they actually did was to recognize Israel in 78% of historical Palestine.
Right.
Which is fine. I have no problem with that. But my argument is that that was a huge compromise from the Palestinian side.
Right. And this was right after the first Intifada, right?
After
So
the
that was
first Intifada.
87 to 93.
Correct.
Right.
It was first Intifada that led to Oslo.
Right.
Because international community found it an urgent matter to take up the Palestinian issue after the Intifada. Israel also came under a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
You had a Labour government when Yitzhak Rabin was the Prime Minister and Shimon Peres was his foreign minister. So the Israelis were open to discuss.
Right.
And there was a peace bloc in Israeli politics at that time who believed that for Israel to live in peace, a Palestinian state has to be created. Right. I mean, that Israel was different from what we have today, the Israel of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So the Israelis were ready to engage the Palestinians. The Palestinians were also ready to engage the Israelis, and the Palestinians were ready to make a huge compromise.
Right.
And the promise of Oslo was that an independent, sovereign Palestinian state would be created.
Right.
But Hamas opposed Oslo.
All right. Okay.
Hamas said this is a huge compromise.
Right.
Which the PLO is making. Because Hamas said we are committed to the liberation of Palestine from the river to the sea, which is the historical Palestine. Right. That is an extremist position, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
Okay. But the practical position we are talking about is Oslo.
Yeah.
But did Oslo materialize?
Exactly.
It didn't.
Yeah. And
Oslo collapsed.
before we go further with this as well, some context about the first Intifada.
Yeah.
So the origin of it was basically, if I'm not wrong, an Israeli vehicle.
It was an accident.
Sort of killed 4 Palestinians there, right?
Correct.
So how did that blow up so much to go on for like years together? And so that was more to do with protests and civil societies and all that. So what role did they play? And what were the stances that the governments took respectively?
See, the accident was basically, it lit the fuse. It was only the trigger.
Right.
But there was this pent-up anger among the Palestinians.
Right.
There is also this growing sense of national identity among the Palestinians. They have a very vibrant national movement at that time led by the PLO.
Yeah.
And a vast majority of countries, especially in the third world, what we call global south today, had recognized the Palestinian struggle, including India. We recognized the Palestinian state back in the 1980s itself, after the Intifada broke out. And we recognized the PLO much in advance as the official representative of the Palestinian people. Yasser Arafat used to come and attend the non-aligned summit, the NAM summit. The Chinese had recognized the PLO. The Russians had done that. You have a strong national movement, but you have a strong national sense now. By this time, you have a national identity, but you don't have a national home. And the Palestinians, they wanted freedom. They wanted to liberate their homeland. So the tension was going on, right? And the anger was building up. And then this thing happened. This accident happened. So that became some kind of a trigger, this nationalist anger that exploded into a mass movement. And the PLO was in the leadership at that time. So first Intifada was largely non-violent, unlike the second Intifada, which was bloody. Largely non-violent means the civil society played an active role in it. It led to massive protests. It led to strikes, sit-ins. PLO was in the leadership. There were some extremist groups who used violence. For example, Hamas had used violence during the Intifada. So it was a collective movement, right? And the purpose of the movement was to convince Israel that the occupation is not cost-free. If you want to continue to occupy the Palestinian territories, there are some costs attached to it. And the message, I think, was very well received by the Israelis. Because that's what we saw in the whole Oslo process, right? Israel's hands were actually twisted or forced into accepting some kind of a peaceful settlement, or into talking to the Palestinians, because until then, the PLO was referred to as a terrorist organization by the Israelis, like what they are calling Hamas today. And Menachem Begin called PLO murderous anti-Semites, quote unquote. Right? So this is how the Israeli establishment looked at the PLO. But in the 1990s, Israel was open to talk to the PLO. So you can see that change. So that is a product of the first Intifada.
But like you said, did it matter, the Oslo Accords? Did it materialize? Did they actually stand by what they signed for?
It didn't.
Right.
So that's what the whole point. I mean, why did Hamas become a popular movement in Palestine? It's because Hamas is the group that opposed Oslo, whereas the PLO stood for Oslo. And when the Oslo process collapsed, when the world failed to implement Oslo, when the international community failed to see the creation of an independent sovereign Palestinian state, at least based on the 1967 border, Hamas felt vindicated. They told the Palestinians that we said this is surrender, we said this is going to fall, and this is falling. Right? So that gave them political currency. That's how political movements are being shaped, right? Hamas emerged as a fringe extremist organization, but after the collapse of the Oslo process, Hamas became one of the main pillars of Palestinian nationalism. Okay, you might agree or disagree with their violence. I do. I don't agree with their ideology. I don't agree with their violence. But as a student of history, you look at how Hamas became a dominant player. All these factors matter. So Oslo eventually collapsed. So, Rabin was the prime minister who signed the two Oslo Accords, 93 and 95. And in 95, I think, Rabin was assassinated by a Jewish extremist who was not happy with him signing the agreements. Rabin was assassinated, and Peres would become his successor. But Peres wanted to take Oslo forward, Shimon Peres. So he wanted a fresh mandate because Rabin was the guy who won the election, not Peres. He wanted to win an election for himself. So he dissolved the Knesset, the parliament, and went to elections. I think the election took place in 96, if I'm not wrong, 95 or 96. And you know who became the prime minister after the elections? It was Netanyahu. So, I mean, basically the fate of Oslo was written after that election.
Just hidden, just nothing after that.
After that, no. I mean, the promise of Oslo was basically to take concrete measures towards the implementation, towards basically the establishment of a Palestinian state. But then after Netanyahu came to power, and Hamas on the other side was carrying out attacks, suicide attacks in the 1990s, and Netanyahu used Hamas attacks basically as an excuse to continue the settlements and the occupation. But the Israeli settlements continue to flourish, mushroom in the Palestinian territories in the West Bank, also in Gaza. Until 2005, you had Israeli settlements in Gaza as well. So Netanyahu basically expanded the settlement process. That brought Oslo to an end, right? And Hamas on the other side became more and more powerful because Yasser Arafat started increasingly looking like a sitting duck, who was not able to do anything, right? So you saw the gradual collapse of the whole Oslo process, mushrooming of the Israeli settlements in the West Bank, Israel gobbling up more Palestinian territories. By 2000, Israelis started building a wall, what they call the security wall, what critics call an apartheid wall. I have seen the wall. I mean, you can't cross the wall, unless you go through this gigantic checkpoints where Israeli troops would be standing with automatic guns, etc., etc. So, the slow death of Oslo became basically fueled the rise of Hamas. And I mean, you can see on the Palestinian side, the PLO got sidelined and Hamas became a very powerful political entity. And on the Israeli side, you can see that the centrist and center-left, I mean, Israeli center-left are basically centrist parties, So those parties were sidelined in Israel and led to the rise of the far right, religious right parties. So, the polity also underwent massive changes on both sides.
So, like you said, would you say all of this also bubbled up to form the second Intifada, 2000 to 2005? Again, the cost for that was not as huge as it should have become, right? So, what was the main cause for it, and would you say again all of this was the eventual? It eventually led to the Second Intifada and all the violence, and it was much worse than the first one.
That's
like you
true.
mentioned.
And Second Intifada, Hamas was in the driving seat.
Right.
And that also explains why Second Intifada was much more violent than the first. Because, and what led to Second Intifada? Again, the first Intifada led to Oslo, and Oslo promised a Palestinian state, which never happened. And Israel tightened its occupation of the West Bank, and settlements started growing. So the PLO lost its currency. Hamas became a powerful, much bigger, politically powerful entity. And the trigger for Second Intifada was a visit by Ariel Sharon to Temple Mount or Haram al-Sharif. Arabs call it Haram al-Sharif, Jews call it Temple Mount. This is the holy place, right? You have the wall, and beyond the wall, you have Al-Aqsa Mosque. And then the visit triggered, because Sharon is a controversial figure. During the 1982 war, Sharon was a military officer, and then it was during the 1982 war the Sabra and Shatila massacre took place. So Sabra and Shatila were two refugee camps, and the Israeli military were basically in bed with Christian extremist organizations in the Phalangist militias of Lebanon. So the Israeli military led the Phalangists into refugee camps, and then they massacred thousands of people. I mean, women, children. It was brutal. So Sharon has always been called the butcher of Sabra and Shatila. He's a very controversial figure who later would become the Prime Minister of Israel. He would become the defense minister, who would become the Prime Minister. He's no more. So Sharon visited Temple Mount. That was the trigger again. But then you will witness a 5-year-long.
So was that sort of considered to be a threat?
Yeah, I mean, the Palestinian anger, again, the pent-up anger would explode after this. Because Sharon's politics was also very challenging. He would say that no Palestinian state and no peace with the Palestinians, no talks with the Palestinians. He was like that, right? He was a Likud guy, Netanyahu's party, but he would split with Likud and form his own party much later. But yeah, so this would lead to Second Intifada, and then you would see very violent movement, violent protests and incidents, suicide bombings, and Israeli military response that would lead to the death of hundreds of people on the Palestinian side, if not thousands. But one eventual outcome of Second Intifada was that the Israelis would realize that, at least in Gaza, it became impossible for them to continue the occupation.
But regardless, even post the Second Intifada, there were multiple attacks on Gaza, right? Between both the Hamas and the Israeli side. There were multiple attacks. Right from the 2008 attack.
That's right.
To right before the 2023
2013.
One, there was the 2021 11-day war.
Yes. Even before October 7th, there were, I think, 5 major attacks. So, see, what happened is that many people, experts of Israel Palestine would come and tell us on talk shows, Western talk shows, that Israel left Gaza in 2005. Then why Hamas is still attacking Israel? So this was part truth, right? So what Israel did in 2005 was that, yes, because of Second Intifada, because of Hamas's violent resistance, Israel decided to pull back troops from Gaza because their troops came under repeated attacks. Israel also decided to pull back the settlers. There were some 10,000 settlers in Gaza in 2005. It was Sharon was the prime minister. Sharon would pull them back, and unilaterally. He won't talk to the Palestinians. He won't cut any deal with the Palestinians. He would say that, yeah, I'm pulling them back. And then what Israel would do was to impose a blockade on Gaza. So Gaza was not free. Israeli troops were not there in Gaza, but Israeli troops continued to monitor Gaza's checkpoints. All the checkpoints. They decided who is going in, who is coming out, except the Rafah crossing with the Egyptian side in the south. All the checkpoints were controlled by the Israelis. The Israelis controlled Gaza's airspace. The Israelis controlled Gaza's maritime space. Everything was controlled by the Israelis. So many people say that Israel left Gaza and then on their own. No, that was not true. And then, as you mentioned, there were repeated attacks. So every time there is a flare-up of violence in the West Bank or in Jerusalem, Hamas would respond to that by firing rockets into Israel, and then Israel would carry out airstrikes in Gaza, killing, hundreds of people. And sometimes this would lead to weeks-long or months-long fighting, aerial fighting between Israel and Hamas. But then Israel resisted the temptation to send troops into Gaza after that, but they always resorted to airstrikes on Gaza. So Hamas continued to basically fight the Israelis. They would launch rockets, and the Israelis would attack them. So this has been going on for quite some time, right? But then after October 7, of course, Israel decided to go in.
Right.
So that's what happened.
So now going back to what you mentioned, I'm sure our audience will also be very interested in knowing your personal experience. You have been there quite a few times. So when was the first time you went there?
To the West Bank, it was 2015.
Right.
My first visit. I've been to West Bank even after that.
Right.
But Israel, I've traveled to Israel several more times. West Bank is today it's not accessible. Gaza definitely not. Even when back in 2015 and 2018 when I went to West Bank, Gaza was not accessible. But I've been to the Gaza border.
Right.
Been to Gaza border in 2022 before the attack.
Okay.
And then even after the attack in 2024.
Okay.
But West Bank is, 2015 when I went to the West Bank, I mean, there were hundreds of Israeli checkpoints in the West Bank.
Right.
So I had a sense, I had some idea about the issue, right? I mean, I was a student of West Asian studies.
Right.
I had some sense of what's happening there. But even then, what I witnessed in the West Bank was shocking.
Right. Can you share something with us? Because you have some very, very interesting accounts of your experience from there in your book. For those who are interested, it's The Original Sin by Stanley Johny. You can check that out for more detailed knowledge about the subject. But talk to us about your experience there. What was it like? Were you ever stopped at a checkpoint? Because I remember reading that.
All the time.
Right.
All the time.
Right.
And
it didn't matter that you were a journalist with permission.
No, it doesn't matter at all.
Okay.
And I had a scary experience also in Israel while coming back from West Bank. In 2015, I mean, checkpoints are a reality there because 2015, today it must be really, really worse than what it used to be. I remember we were living in Movenpick Hotel in Ramallah. Even when I went there again, I picked the same hotel. It was a decent hotel in Ramallah. And I mean, I like to talk to people when I remember having conversation with the bartender in Movenpick who told me that he was not able to see his pregnant sister because of the wall. He can't cross the wall because he wanted to take a special permit from the Israelis. He was not getting the permit. I mean, I have all the stories about these people. And then traveling from Ramallah is the administrative headquarters of the Palestinian Authority. But Palestinian Authority is basically not an authority at all. It is an authority only in the name.
Namesake,
I tell my students that Chennai Corporation is more powerful than the Palestinian Authority. It is a tragic reality, So we were going to Abu Dis from Ramallah. Abu Dis is where you have this university, Abu Dis University, which is a large university. When I was there was a huge protest in Abu Dis University by the Palestinian students. But you will have to go through multiple Israeli checkpoints.
Right.
So that is a reality wherever in the West Bank. You will have to basically, and you can also see these cars stacked upon each other, burned cars. So I was initially wondering why. I mean, is it? Then I checked with somebody, and then that is a result of the conflict. The Israelis come and bomb. So the destroyed vehicles, they go and pile them up in one places, and you will see that across the West Bank.
Right.
But back in 2018, so I was, my return flight is from Tel Aviv. I was in Ramallah, again in Movenpick Hotel. The hotel guys told me that they can't send me in the local taxi because the local taxi cannot take the Jerusalem-Tel Aviv highway.
Okay.
It's the apartheid highway because a local Palestine cannot take that highway. It's inaccessible to him.
Right.
So I will have to bring, and the Israeli cab drivers will not come to Ramallah.
Okay.
The Israelis can take the highway, but they won't come to Ramallah. So the guy at the hotel told me that he will bring in a cab from Jerusalem, East Jerusalem, an Arab cab driver, because those who are in East Jerusalem, they have a special permit. They can take the highway.
Okay.
So he will come to Ramallah, pick me up, and then drop me at Tel Aviv airport. So from Ramallah, we will have to first cross the Kalandia checkpoint, which is a huge checkpost, 12 feet wall.
Right.
And you can see Banksy's graffiti on the wall, Free Palestine, etc., etc. So the Israelis came and then they checked my passport, and they will also give you a permit at the airport, Tel Aviv airport, when you land. You will have to keep the permit.
Okay.
So I told them I'm a journalist, etc. So this time they asked some questions and then let me go. And then before the Tel Aviv airport, there is a huge checkpoint in Israel proper on the highway. So they stopped me. So my driver is an Arab guy from East Jerusalem who spoke broken English but clearly communicated things with me. We were talking about the condition of Jerusalem, etc., etc. So they asked me to get out, pick my bags, took me to the screening room, made me open the bag, took away my passport, and then asked me to wait in a room next to the screening room, which was a small room. One screen was there, and I had to sit there for some 20 minutes. I didn't know what was happening. My bag was in another room. I didn't have my passport. I have to catch a flight. So no idea. So maybe after, I think, 20 minutes or something, the door was open. The Israeli soldier came and then told me that you can go. Then I asked for my passport. He said, you will get it. I said, where is my bag? Bag is there in the screening room. I went to the screening room. My bags were open. Everything was taken out. And I had to do it myself. In the screening room, surrounded by Israeli troops holding automatic guns. So I had to repack it and got out. And the driver came, and then he told me that, I'm sorry, brother, it's all because of me, he said, because he's an Arab driver. I don't know whether it is because of him. I don't know whether it is because of him or whether because I went to Ramallah. We don't know the reason, but yeah, he said this. And I still haven't got my passport, right? I was waiting at the car, and after a while, one soldier came and gave me the passport and then said, you can go. And another officer was waiting for me at the airport, apparently, and then he also took away my passport.
Right.
The same day. He took away my passport, he asked me to wait. And I had to wait at the airport. I was also worried because I didn't want to miss the flight. Those days, you didn't have a direct flight between India. Now you can direct flight from Bombay. I think there is one from Delhi as well. But I think because I took a flight to Istanbul and then a connection from Istanbul to Tel Aviv, I was flying back in the same route. So I didn't want to miss the flight, But then I had to wait again, and then he came back and gave me the passport. Then it was all clear. But it was a very tense experience that I had in Israel. I think it's mainly because I'm a journalist, and then I went to Ramallah, to the Palestinian territories. But I kept telling the soldiers that I'm traveling to cover the visit of Indian Prime Minister. And India is a friendly country of Israel, right? And the Indian Prime Minister calls Netanyahu a friend of his. I kept telling the soldiers, but nothing worked. Yeah.
That was the situation of, like you said, a journalist with permission covering the Prime Minister. I can only imagine what normal people there will be facing.
Exactly.
But like you mentioned, the wall. Let's talk about the wall. So it essentially means that Palestinians don't have access to other Palestinian territories, essentially, right?
Israel says that the wall separates Palestinian towns and Israel proper when they started building it in 2000. But see, if you look at the wall is not exactly along the Green Line. Green Line is the 67 border.
Right.
The wall cuts deeper into the Palestinian territories. Okay. So effectively, the security wall has already allowed Israel to capture more territories. And then even within the Palestinian territories, Israel has built several smaller barriers. For example, see, some 500,000 Israeli Jews are living in the West Bank.
Right.
400 to 500,000. 300,000 Israeli Jews are living in Jerusalem, East Jerusalem. So let's say some 700,000, more than 700,000 settlers are there in the Palestinian territories. And they are living in Jewish settlements. And the Palestinians do not have any access to these settlements unless you work there, you have a permit there. Otherwise, you can't go into these territories, right? And these Jewish settlements are also now separated by big walls.
Right.
So practically the walls and the checkpoints, block the Palestinians or disrupt their movements. There are, I think, when I checked last, some 560 checkpoints are there in the West Bank.
Right.
560 checkpoints. So if you are a Palestinian, if you want to go from one town to the other, you will have to go through an Israeli checkpoint.
Right.
If you are a Palestinian who met with an accident, who is sick, if you are a pregnant Palestinian woman who has to make it to a hospital quickly, you will have to go through an Israeli checkpoint. There is no other way. 540 checkpoints. So that's the reality of the life in the West Bank.
Before I let you go for today, just a last couple of questions. So, in all these wars that we've spoken about, of course, India recognized Israel, one of the first few, and early on as well. So, what was India's stance in all these wars until, let's talk about the 2023 one for the next episode, but until that point, what was India's stance?
Quickly, we will recap. 1947, India opposed to the partition of Palestine. When the state of Israel was created, India recognized the state of Israel, but India stopped short of establishing full diplomatic relations with Israel.
Right.
When the PLO was formed, India recognized the PLO as the official representative of the Palestinian people. And Indian prime ministers repeatedly, Indian prime ministers means from Jawaharlal Nehru, Manmohan Singh,
Right.
repeatedly voiced support for the Palestinian cause. Right? India supported the creation of a Palestinian state. India still supports the creation of a Palestinian state. But Indian prime ministers have repeatedly voiced their strong support for the Palestinian cause. And during the wars, if you talk about the Suez War, India played a constructive role in bringing peace to the Suez War. Nehru had taken a principled position. He opposed the French. Initially he discouraged Nasser from taking any military action, and then once the French and the British invaded Egypt, Nehru said it was a reversal of history because colonialism is coming back. This is exactly he said. He called it a reversal of history. He opposed it. He used UN to build the global opposition towards the war, and he worked with both Bulganin and the US leadership, President Eisenhower, to make sure that the peace comes. And in 1967 and in 1973, India strongly opposed the war.
Right.
India strongly opposed the, 1967 it opposed to the Israeli invasion. 1973, India supported the UN resolution. And throughout the Intifada, as we can see that India is a country that supported the Palestinian, the PLO or the PLO's quest for nationhood, right? We recognized the Palestine state, independent state, which the UK is today talking about. The Indians did this in 1980s. So we recognized Palestine as an independent country. We have an embassy in Delhi. The Palestine embassy is there. And even after that, in 1990s, the world was changing because 1993 means, early 1990s means Arab countries themselves were warming up to Israel. Egypt had already signed a deal. Jordan would sign a deal in 1994. Oslo process was underway. There was this Madrid peace conference was there, in which the Israelis and the Palestinians were brought together. The world was changing. The Soviet Union collapsed. The United States became the only superpower. The Indians were also keen on building better ties with the Western Bloc. So in the early 1990s, India would establish full diplomatic relationship with Israel. Right? And that relationship will flourish in the subsequent years and decades. But until recently, India's position was that India supports the creation of an independent, sovereign Palestinian state based on the 1967 border, with East Jerusalem being its capital. So India doesn't talk about the border today, capital today, but India says that it supports the two-state solution. So when you say you support the two-state solution, what you actually mean is that you support the creation of a Palestinian state because the Israel state is already there.
Right.
Right. So this is what India's position is, roughly speaking. Today you can see both changes and continuity in India's position, but more or less India says that on the one side you have a very good ties with Israel, but at the same time you say that you stay committed to basically the two-state solution.
Right. So more on the peace processes, the two-state solution, and the ongoing war in the next episode. But finally, what would you say is the most misunderstood aspect of all these wars from 1948 until the very recent one? In your opinion, what would you say is the most misunderstood aspect?
So I think, failure to understand the historical complexities of this war, or just to look at it through the religious lens.
Right.
I think that is the tragedy of this conflict, right? Many people, religion plays a major role in it, but since Israel is a Jewish country and the Palestinians are predominantly Muslim, for many people this is a religious issue. This is between two Abrahamic faiths, and when religion is involved, people tend to form their opinions based on that. Because, for example, of course there are anti-Semitic people, there are Islamophobes in the world, right? And for the Islamophobes, whatever Israel is doing is acceptable. And the anti-Semitics would argue that Israel has to be destroyed. Israel doesn't have any right to exist. So, that kind of extremist position, you will find this. Instead, if you look at the history, and this is basically a land problem, this is a political problem. Even if Israel and Palestine belong to different religions, this issue would still be there because the state of Israel was created in a geographical entity called Palestine. That's a fact. But Israel is also a reality. That's also a fact. So you accept Israel's existence, but you still don't have a Palestinian state. So, the solution is the creation of a Palestinian state. But if you want to create a Palestinian state, the question is what should be the border of a Palestinian state? There is no consensus about the border, about capital, about the right of the return of the Palestinian refugees. So these are the unsettled issues, right? So essentially this is a political problem. This is a problem about occupation and occupied. So people sometimes do not get it. They go after easy solutions that Israel is fighting terror. It's the end of it. Palestinians are terrorists. And Israel is fighting terrorism. Or this is a Jewish versus Muslim problem. I think these are easy ways of looking at, simpleton ways of looking at a complex problem. I hope people would open up, look at the historical complexities, get facts, get some humanity, and try to understand this issue.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thank you. I think that brings us to the end of this episode.
Thank you very much.
Over the last 5 decades, every war, every uprising, and every broken peace deal has reshaped the land and the people who live there. And today, we are seeing the consequences unfold once again. In our next episode, we turn to the present. We will talk about the blockade of Gaza, the shifts in Israeli politics, and the brutal cycles of violence that continue to cost civilian lives. Tens of thousands of Palestinians have been killed. Entire neighborhoods in Gaza have been destroyed. Hospitals have been bombed. Aid has been blocked. And across the world, the word genocide is being spoken in parliaments, on protest signs, and in courtrooms. How did it come to this? And is there still a way out? Join us next time as we move from the pages of history to the urgency of the headlines. Because in this conflict, the past is never really in the past. That's all for now. If you have any questions or feedback, write to us at podcast@thehindu.co.in. Thanks for tuning in. This is Global Fault Lines, the Hindu's international affairs podcast.